at the very edge of the planet, there are questions no one has ever truly answered. What is time in a place where daylight lasts 24 hours and so does the night? What is life when ice can swallow an entire mountain whole? And what is courage when the only thing standing between you and a polar bear is not a weapon, not a safe distance, but simply whether it sees you first or you see it? Let's see if you can find the answers before the Arctic chooses to answer you itself. Ilulissat is often described as the most famous town in Greenland, and once you arrive, the reason becomes obvious almost immediately. The town sits along the edge of Ilulissat Isefjord, the first site in Greenland ever recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Area. From almost anywhere in town, you can look out toward the fjord and see icebergs rising out of the water like frozen monuments. Their sheer size makes the distance difficult to judge. Some reach close to 300 feet in height, drifting slowly through the narrow inlet as if the entire shoreline were part of their path. All of these massive blocks come from Kujalleq, the largest glacier in the Northern Hemisphere and one of the fastest moving glaciers on Earth. It advances at a pace of nearly 130 feet per day, pushing centuries of compressed snow toward the sea. When a section finally breaks away, the result is a sound that carries through the hills surrounding the town. A deep rumble spreads outward, followed by the crash of ice striking water. It is not dramatic for effect, it is simply how the fjord behaves. Life here has adapted to this environment. Ilulissat is home to nearly 2,500 sled dogs, an essential part of local culture. You hear them before you see them, a rising chorus from the edges of town, where they rest in groups. For many fishermen, dog sleds are not tradition, but necessity. During winter, when sea ice forms a solid route across the fjord, they travel by sled to reach the fishing grounds and haul back heavy halibut caught through holes cut in the ice. This method has been used for more than 1,000 years, shaped by terrain and temperature rather than fashion. As we move forward in the journey, the Arctic reveals another side of its character-distant fishing villages. Jagged peaks and colors that refuse to fade even in winter. A row of red wooden houses sits on the edge of a sheltered harbor, set against a steep, almost slopeless mountainside. This contrast of red, white, and dark rock has become one of the most recognized compositions in the islands. The cabins stand on wooden stilts above the tide. Snow gathers along their roofs in sharp angles. The mountain behind them climbs almost straight up, with streaks of ice running down its face. It creates a contrast that photographers wait hours to capture, even in heavy wind. The scene remains active throughout the season, because residents continue their routines regardless of the cold. Another cluster of buildings occupies a deeper fjord where boats anchor close to shore. The houses are painted in reds and whites, similar to those seen across northern Norway, and their placement reflects a long history of winter fishing. Cod season peaks during the coldest months, which means activity is steady even when storms approach. Nets, lines, and drying racks stand near the water, and the harbor fills with the sound of engines starting up before the first daylight appears. The layout of the village shows how people have adapted work patterns to a coastline, with limited shelter and strong currents. Farther along, the archipelago stands a curved bridge built high enough for small vessels to pass under it. Snow travels across its surface in thin sheets when the wind accelerates. The structure provides a clear view of beaches, channels, and the angular mountains that define this part of the islands. It is a brief element in the larger landscape, but an accurate representation of the engineering required to connect scattered communities. Conditions shift quickly across the region, and the transition from these settlements sets the stage for an entirely different environment shaped by winter culture and subarctic traditions. Rovaniemi functions as the administrative center of Lapland and is recognized internationally as the home associated with Santa Claus. The city sits directly on the Arctic Circle, which gives the location a specific geographic identity. During the winter season, about 5 miles north of the urban center, a collection of wooden buildings forms what is known as Santa Claus Village. The structures are arranged around pedestrian paths, and lighting remains active through the dark hours to support year-round visitation. One of the main facilities in this area is Santa's main post office. Staff process more than 500,000 letters each year, most addressed to Santa by children living in different parts of the world. Mail is sorted by language and country, and special seasonal stamps are applied for outgoing cards. The indoor temperature, lighting, and steady movement of staff give the space a clear sense of routine throughout the winter. Rovaniemi itself has grown over several decades from a small northern settlement into a fully developed city. It includes transportation links, educational institutions, and cultural venues that operate throughout the winter. Modern services run alongside long-standing regional traditions, creating a setting where seasonal tourism and daily life function simultaneously. This combination of tradition, infrastructure, and winter activity defines the area during its coldest months. Is shaped by rules and light cycles that differ sharply from most communities. When the sun sets on October 5, residents understand that the next 155 days will pass without direct sunlight. Streets remain lit through the 24-hour darkness, and people adjust sleep cycles, work schedules, and outdoor routines to compensate. During the opposite period, from April 20 to August 23, the sun stays above the horizon through the night. Continuous daylight affects rest patterns, and many rely on blackout curtains and strict habits to maintain regular sleep. Environmental conditions influence how the population is managed. Permafrost prevents natural decomposition, and burials were discontinued decades ago because bodies remained preserved in the permafrost, creating a hygiene risk. It is often referred to as the town where dying is not permitted. This situation led to policies that require residents with severe illness, advanced age, or late-term pregnancy to travel to mainland facilities. They return only after recovery or childbirth. These measures maintain public health in an area where medical resources are limited. More than 3,000 polar bears inhabit the region, and carrying a firearm beyond the boundary is mandatory. Public buildings often have a basket of rifles near the entrance, along with a funny note taped to the wall. All the polar bears in this store are dead. Please leave your weapons to the staff. The message serves as a practical reminder rather than decoration. During the winter darkness, residents often choose to spend time in shared spaces to avoid long periods indoors without natural light. Community centers, small cafes, and local facilities help maintain interaction during these months. Roads follow a numbering system instead of individual names. Houses along these routes are painted in strong, distinct colors that remain visible against snow and low-contrast lighting. These choices reflect long-term adjustments made to maintain clarity, safety, and routine in an environment shaped by cold temperatures and seasonal extremes. There is a town that still stands, even though its residents no longer live in it. Rows of Soviet-era apartment blocks occupy the center of the valley, built with rectangular shapes, straight corridors, and repetitive window patterns typical of the period. The buildings remain structurally stable, but their outer walls show fading paint, exposed concrete, and signs of long-term weathering. Snow gathers along the ledges, and wind leaves thin layers of ice on the lower levels. A wide main street cuts through the settlement. Its surface is uneven due to years of freeze and thaw, and patches of gravel appear through the snow depending on the season. The layout follows a simple grid, with open spaces between structures designed for workers' facilities, housing, and industrial operations. Streetlights remain in their original positions, though many poles lean at slight angles after years without maintenance. The central square contains the well-known statue of Lenin, positioned on a concrete pedestal. The statue faces the glacier that marks the end of the valley. This orientation was part of the original planning and still provides a clear visual anchor when surveying the settlement. Industrial buildings stand toward the upper slopes. Conveyor towers, metal frameworks, and sections of the coal transport system remain visible. Their surfaces carry rust, frost, and snow, but the structural outlines are easy to interpret. These external elements show how coal once moved from extraction points towards storage and shipping areas. Wooden barracks, service buildings, and recreational halls line the sides of the settlement. Many windows are either frosted over or partially covered, reducing visibility inside, yet the exterior forms retain their original geometry. The overall scene presents a preserved arrangement of infrastructure and housing shaped by cold temperatures and decades without activity. Following the silent blocks of the abandoned valley, this settlement shows a continuous pattern of work and residency. A group of Soviet-style apartment buildings painted in strong colors stands along a narrow incline. Flat roofs, uniform windows, and snow-packed stairwells define the residential area. Russian signage marks public structures such as the cultural house and administrative offices. The coal mine dominates the industrial zone. Storage silos, conveyor frames, and loading platforms operate through scheduled shifts, and coal residue forms a dark layer across the snow near processing areas. The harbor functions with steady use. Supply boats arrive at set intervals, and equipment is arranged along the quay in clear rows, creating an organized working area. Murals reflecting Russian and Ukrainian heritage appear near the main road, positioned beside essential infrastructure. These elements outline a compact Arctic community shaped by mining activity and maintained through year-round occupation. Beyond the mining settlement, another community shows a different structure shaped by isolation, color, and coastal wildlife. A compact urban center stands along the shoreline, marked by rows of houses painted in vibrant reds, blues, greens, and yellows. The layout is built on sloping terrain without any road connection to surrounding regions. Access depends entirely on air and sea routes, giving the city a degree of separation uncommon for a national capital. Modern buildings, schools, and administrative offices are arranged close to the waterfront, forming a dense and recognizable pattern beneath the presence of Samitsiak, the mountain that dominates the skyline. Wildlife activity appears close to residential areas during several months of the year. Humpback whales enter the fjord and move through the water near the harbor. Their tail flukes rise clearly above the surface, within sight of apartment blocks and coastal walkways. The contrast between marine mammals and urban structures becomes visible throughout the season and is often documented from elevated viewpoints. The coastline includes docking areas for fishing vessels and supply boats that support daily life. Small boats move across the inlet, while residential areas maintain a steady rhythm shaped by local work schedules. Colored houses, moving water, and the constant outline of Samitsiak create a consistent frame for observing the city. south of the capital area, a separate headland displays a different form of Arctic exposure. A flat plateau rises directly above the ocean, ending in a vertical cliff more than 307 feet high. The surface is exposed, with no natural barriers to reduce the impact of the wind. Conditions shift quickly, and strong gusts remain common throughout the winter season. Visitors often brace themselves when walking across the open ground, especially near the cliff line, where sound carries clearly over the water. A steel globe sculpture stands at the center of the viewpoint. The structure is used as a geographic marker and has become the most recognizable installation in the area. Its metal frame withstands heavy wind, low temperatures, and periods of freezing mist that coat the surface in thin layers of ice. Surrounding paths and railings remain visible even when snow levels rise, creating a defined space for observation. The plateau, the exposed cliff, and the fixed position of the steel globe provide a straightforward representation of this northern point during winter. After the wind-exposed headland, the landscape transitions into an inland region shaped by frozen lakes, long darkness, and dense subarctic forest. A wide frozen surface stretches across the northern interior, surrounded by low ridges and dark conifer stands. The Lake Inarijärvi carries long-standing cultural significance, and during winter, its surface becomes a continuous field of ice that supports movement and seasonal activity. Snow settles in even layers along the shoreline, reducing visible detail and giving the terrain a uniform brightness during the short daylight hours. Winter darkness extends for long periods in this region. Daily schedules rely on artificial lighting, and outdoor work is timed according to twilight rather than full daylight. Auroral activity appears frequently. Green and occasional red arcs form across the sky when conditions allow, visible from open lake edges or clearings in the forest. The lights vary in strength and remain unpredictable, creating a distinct contrast with the earlier hours of darkness. The surrounding taiga consists of tall spruce and pine arranged in long vertical lines. Snow weighs down the branches, and sound carries far across the still forest. Footpaths used by residents and routes associated with reindeer herding cut through the trees in straight, practical corridors. These paths remain active through winter, linking small clusters of homes, storage structures, and inland vantage points. Changes in light, forest density, and frozen water define the character of this northern interior throughout the cold months. As the forest and frozen lake define the inland region, the surrounding communities maintain practices that have developed through generations of work with reindeer. A group of reindeer often moves across the snow in coordinated lines, following routes that have been used for herding and seasonal migration. Their movement establishes the rhythm for many Sami Tuktoyaktuk families, whose livelihoods depend on managing these animals across long distances. GPS tools and modern equipment are used today, yet the core structure of herding remains based on knowledge passed through family networks. Traditional clothing appears during community gatherings and work involving reindeer. Garments are made from wool, reindeer hide, and locally sourced materials. Stitch patterns mark regional identity, and metal details are added for durability rather than decoration. The colors vary by area and family group, producing combinations that can be identified by those familiar with Sami textile practices. Traditional vocal practices, including yoik, are performed in both informal and organized settings. Yoik uses sustained tones and repetitive structures, often expressing connections to people, animals, or locations. Performers stand in small groups or alone, maintaining consistent pitch, while others observe quietly. The sound carries clearly in open spaces due to the cold, stable air. Across the Arctic tundra of northern Russia, a long peninsula supports one of the most persistent nomadic herding systems in the region. A long line of reindeer can often be seen moving across the flat tundra, pulling sleds loaded with supplies. This movement marks the seasonal migration practiced by Nenets families, who travel several hundred miles each year between winter and summer pastures. The routes remain consistent across generations, determined by grazing conditions and the need to keep herds in stable health. During winter, temperatures can fall near -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The tundra hardens into a compact surface, and snowdrifts form along the prevailing wind direction. Nenets groups establish temporary camps using structures known as chum. These conical tents are built from reindeer hides stretched over long poles. Arranged to provide insulation and allow heat from an interior stove to circulate in a controlled way. This structure is designed for quick assembly and disassembly, which is essential for grazing. Daily activity centers around the reindeer. Families monitor the herd's condition, manage feeding areas, and prepare sleds for movement. Children participate in tasks according to age, such as gathering wood, melting snow for water, or checking harness equipment. The sound of reindeer hooves and sled runners against the frozen ground forms a steady background throughout the season. Clothing is adapted to the extreme temperatures. Reindeer hide provide significant insulation and maintain flexibility during long hours outside. Boots, mittens, and outer layers follow patterns refined through practical use rather than stylistic preference. As daylight varies and temperatures shift, the herd continues its migration across open tundra, marking the seasonal cycle that defines Nenets' mobility and winter living conditions. As the tundra opens into wide migration routes, another Arctic region shows a denser pattern of settlement shaped by maritime access and winter light. A series of bridges, docks, and densely arranged forming the recognizable structure of Tromsø, one of the principal Arctic cities in northern Norway. The location has long served as a staging point for Arctic expeditions, and several buildings within the city retain archives, equipment, and documentation linked to early polar research. And a white exterior that remains visible even in low winter light. Its design allows interior illumination to project outward during the dark season, creating a recognizable landmark across the surrounding water. Nighttime activity continues throughout the winter months. Street lighting, shop interiors, and residential windows produce isolated pockets of brightness, while the landscape remains in extended darkness. Pedestrians move along cleared walkways, and public transportation maintains regular schedules. On clear nights, auroral arcs appear above the city, forming broad shapes that extend beyond the mountain ridges. These displays are viewed from waterfront areas, open plazas, and elevated residential zones where obstructed sight lines are limited. the coastal landscape shifts again, revealing a settlement positioned where steep rock meets open water. Colorful wooden houses appear first, positioned along a sharp incline where buildings anchor directly into bedrock. This is Umanak, a Greenlandic community named after the heart-shaped mountain that rises immediately behind it. In the Kala-Alisut language, Umanak translates to heart-like, referring to the twin peaks that form the mountain's recognizable outline as it elevates straight out of the ocean. The settlement occupies a narrow coastal zone where blue water, white ice, and exposed rock converge. Summer brings a period of continuous daylight, lasting about 2 months, during which the sun remains above the horizon. In winter, the sun stays below the horizon for a period of time, creating a long twilight that covers the landscape in deep, even tones. Both periods influence daily activity and determine how residents plan movement, fishing, and community events. Inuit families maintain established routines centered around fishing, hunting, and seasonal work. Small boats dock along the shoreline, and equipment for winter travel is stored in sheds near the water. The scale of the settlement allows most activity to occur within short distances, with footpaths connecting houses, storage areas, and local facilities. The mountain remains visible from most vantage points, and its fixed outline allows residents and visitors to orient themselves quickly as the light changes across the season. The last cluster of homes, the ground narrows into a corridor leading directly to the ice front. A broad line of white and blue ice rises abruptly from the tundra, forming a vertical barrier with a height of nearly 200 feet. Russell Glacier, one of the most accessible edges of the Greenland ice sheet, and a clear boundary between exposed ground and the larger mass of interior ice. The front of the glacier shows distinct layers created by cycles of compression, snowfall, and melt, each contributing to the texture of the wall. Movement within the ice becomes noticeable through deep cracks that open and close as the glacier advances. At the base, meltwater flows steadily from several openings. The water carries fine glacial silt, creating an opaque, pale surface that moves quickly across the rocky ground. Channels formed by earlier melt direct the flow toward lower terrain, leaving streaks of sediment along the path. As light changes across the day, the height and texture of Russell Glacier become more defined, making the ice front appear sharper against the surrounding tundra. The terrain opens up into vast inland tundra regions where vegetation is low and ridges are shallow. In this environment, musk oxen appear as steady, slow-moving figures across the landscape. Their presence marks one of the longest continuous animal lineages in the Arctic. With ancestors that occupied northern regions long before modern human settlement. The animals carry a dense outer coat and a layer of kvyat beneath it, a fine insulation that retains warmth even during strong winter storms. This structure allows them to remain standing in open ground without seeking shelter during severe weather. Groups often move in compact formations, with younger animals positioned near the center, while adults orient themselves outward. Historical hunting reduced musk oxen numbers across many tundra regions, with several populations disappearing entirely by the early 20th century. Reintroduction programs later established new herds using individuals transported from northern Canada and Greenland. These efforts produced stable populations that expanded gradually across suitable grazing areas, occupying valleys and upland plains that had been without the species for decades. In summer, they graze on patches of willow and sedge that grow between rocky outcrops, leaving narrow trails that remain visible after the vegetation is worn down. A wide, rising expanse of white ice dominates the horizon, forming a surface that appears uninterrupted as it stretches inland. This region marks the approach to point 6060, where access to the Greenland ice sheet becomes possible from the western side. This ice sheet is the second largest ice mass in the world, covering about 80% of Greenland, with a total area of roughly 667,000 square miles. From ground level, its scale becomes more apparent as the terrain transitions from rocky moraine to compacted ice. The surface is not uniform. Close inspection reveals fissures, melt channels, and depressions shaped by seasonal temperature changes. During summer, narrow streams of meltwater move through some of these channels, forming temporary pools with colors that range from white and gray to deep blue. In areas affected by windborne sediment, patches of darker ice appear, creating additional variation across the surface. Wind remains a constant factor. Gusts travel across the open ice without obstruction, carrying fine grains of snow that move in thin sheets along the ground. At the boundary, where ice meets exposed rock, runoff from meltwater collects briefly before flowing downslope. Protective clothing becomes essential, and equipment must be secured to prevent displacement. Humans appear small compared to the height and width of the iceberg, and their movements are limited to designated access routes. Steep granite walls rise sharply from a broad glacial valley, forming one of the most prominent mountain profiles in the Canadian Arctic. Mount Thor, located within Tuktoyaktuk National Park, stands out for its west face, which drops more than 4,100 feet in a near vertical line. The dark granite surface displays long fractures and compression marks that outline the region's geological history. Tuktoyaktuk, meaning the land that never melts, in Inuktitut, covers roughly 7,500 square miles. The park contains extensive glaciers, deep valleys, and a series of sharply defined peaks that maintain snow cover throughout much of the year. The Akshayuk Pass extends for 97 kilometers between Chikiktarjuak and Pangnitung, creating a continuous walking route that has become one of Nunavut's most established passages through the granite landscape. The route follows glacial corridors surrounded by ridges that rise steeply on both sides. Low-angle sunlight accentuates the height of the valley walls, leaving some sections in consistent shadow, while others remain clearly illuminated. Meltwater rivers travel in straight channels across the valley floor, exposing boulders and bedrock shaped by glacial movement. Patches of tundra vegetation appear in limited areas, providing small zones of color against the darker rock. As conditions shift across the day, the edges of Mount Thor remain sharply visible, emphasizing the vertical structure that defines this section of the park. Tuktoyaktuk and Pingos, low rises begin appearing across the coastal plain, forming rounded shapes that stand out from the surrounding flat tundra. These formations introduce the landscape around Tuktoyaktuk, a community positioned near one of the world's highest concentrations of pingos. The structures develop when groundwater freezes and expands beneath the surface, lifting soil in a slow, steady process that can take centuries to reach full height. Some reach more than 160 feet, with exposed layers of earth covering a core of solid ice. The name Tuktoyaktuk, meaning resembling a caribou, originates from the appearance of these hills when viewed from a distance. Early observers identified the repeating shapes across the horizon and associated them with animals grazing on open ground. Between the Pingos and the shoreline, small clusters of homes occupy narrow sections of stable ground. Many are painted in strong colors, creating clear contrast against the muted tones of the coastal plain. Shallow lakes, tidal channels, and low-lying permafrost terrain surround the settlement, shaping travel routes and daily activity. As the light spreads across the plain, the Pingos create a series of rounded profiles that extend toward the coast, guiding the eye naturally in the direction of the final stretch of the northern landscape. Outro standing at the edge of the far north, scale becomes unmistakable. Human presence reduces to a small figure against distances shaped by ice, wind, and long cycles of time. Every iceberg preserves layers formed across millions of years, and each gust carries signs of a landscape built through endurance. The Arctic is more than snow and frozen water. It is a record of the past and a signal of what comes next. As the view lifts, the terrain blends into one continuous field of white, shadow, and open water. Are you ready to lose yourself in the far north?